Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session, off-axis guiding. But I do want to mention today, at the end of this session, we are going to run one of our first giveaways. And being in astrophotography, basically it's a good deal if you ask me, but we do have to have you pay shipping for it. And what I'm going to do is I'll go into the product just a really little bit now, and then at the end of the session, I'm going to have you type your names in chat. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to say. But the giveaway is only available to people who are taking part in the chat. But you can go onto our website, theastroimagingchannel.com, watch from there and take part in the chat, or just pop out the chat and watch it from wherever you're watching now. But get to our website. Please ignore the fireworks, and my dog is in the background. Tonight's giveaway, and I'm going to pull up the website while I'm doing it. Tonight's giveaway is by the Stellarmate. It is a all-in-one acquisition device, all in a nice tight package. There's a picture of it right there. And if you remember, and if you don't remember, Jasem Mutlak was presenting on Indian Ecos or K-Stars, which is I believe a Linux-based platform. But with this device, he's gone multi-platform. So you have the device, and you can run it from a number of different devices. For example, your phone or your computer or whatever you may want. They are an overseas company, and the device is going to, well, I believe it is on the market right now, but we're going to be getting some of the first few devices. And the only thing we ask, yes, it's a giveaway, but because he's so far away, we just ask that you pay the shipping of $35, which actually sounds like a bargain for a device like this, which you would expect to cost a lot of money, particularly in this hobby. But this device itself does not cost that much money. You can buy this device for $150 plus shipping. And I am sure that after this giveaway goes out and we get some feedback on it, we'll have either Jasem or maybe some of the users on to discuss it and to tell us what they like about it, and basically just help you guys decide whether this is for you. But again, I just wanted to say in advance, we're just going to charge you the $35 shipping fee. That's all you have to pay. And the one thing that Jasem, Jasem requested was that he gets feedback from you. This isn't a beta test, but you might as well treat it like one and just give them as much feedback as you can. It is open source, and they have a limited number of developers working on it, and they want to be able to make the most of their time and fix all the stuff that's important to the users. So that's what I'm going to say about that till the end of the session. You've got some time to get yourself into the chat, but I would suggest doing it quickly, whether you have questions about OAGs or about this device. Although I only have what Jasem has given me to say, and I think I've covered most of it. If this sounds really interesting to you and you really need to hear more about it, go to their website, stellarmate.com, and check it out. And I do not mind if you're checking out the website during my session if off-axis guiders don't interest you. But get an idea whether this is something you might want to demo. And if so, then, I don't know, sign up for the giveaway at the end of the session. The next thing, our image of the week goes to Dave Watkins for his NGC 6888, the Crescent Nebula, taken with the 120mm f5 refractor. Looks like H-alpha 03. Okay, so it is an H-alpha 03 Lume RGB image. Very nice image. Got a nice, got the nice 03 shell out there. And congrats to Dave Watkins. And as always, remember, you guys can submit your images on our website, theastroimagingchannel.com. drop the image of the week bar down, and then you'll see the submission page. Okay, wow, that felt like a lot. My presentation is on off-axis guiding, and let me get it started for you. Oh, good, right there. Oh no, off-axis gilding. I remember that. I hope I didn't do this what I think I did. I'm sorry. Okay, no, we're fine. We're fine. But you just saw the whole presentation. I have an older version of this, and I had that spelling error in there, and I was afraid I had my a blank last half of the presentation. Off-axis guiding. There are generally two methods of guiding. There are probably, well, there are more, but in general, I'd say there are two methods of guiding. The first will be what I'll call traditional guiding, or what a lot of people coming into the hobby are pushed towards using, piggyback guiding. There's some benefits to piggyback guiding. You get two scopes on the mount. Sometimes the idea of having two scopes on the mount is just, I don't know, it seems, should I say cooler? You've got two different focal lengths on one mount. You may not have to switch it as frequently. You don't have to move it as frequently. You can switch the cameras for a different field of view, but in general, I think if you're coming from a visual-centric approach, you say, well, two scopes, yeah, that makes sense. The other benefit is it's really easy to find a guide scar with a nice wide field scope. Oh, sorry, I want to step back, two scopes on the mount. The other thing is you can also use just a teeny piggyback, what am I looking for? Sorry, I'm having a finder scope. I'm sorry, geez, that was a brain fire. A finder scope, which will let you, you're imaging at a lower focal, you're guiding at a lower focal length, but the less weight that's on there is actually a benefit. And your focal length with guiding isn't as important as you would think. You can guide at about 1/5 your focal length without any adverse effects. And when I say without any adverse effects, I did see some limitations to that, and I will go against the grain where I say I think you do get a benefit to imaging at a longer, to guiding at a longer focal length, but you do not have to guide at a longer focal length, and for a lot of people, it will be adequate to guide at that 1/5 your focal length ratio. The other benefit of using that wide field scope or the finder scope is it doesn't require a great guide camera. You're imaging at a fast F ratio, you've got lots of stars in a wide field. You are going to be able to find a guide star guaranteed every time, even with the cheapest guide camera on the market out there, even with an RGB guide camera, which is, of course, going to be less sensitive than a monochrome. It's easy to set these up. When I say easy, it's intuitive to set these up. You really do know what you have to do, right? You put the guide scope on there, appropriate mounting, you focus it, and what? You put your camera on and you're done. I should say you put your camera on, you focus it, and you're done. It's intuitive. That's the point. The other benefit, and I mentioned it before, is that you can switch cameras. You can flip-flop. On there you see my DSLR and my guide camera in my edge, so I was wide field imaging. But you can put your guide camera on your wide field scope, and you can put your camera on your long focal length scope and interchange them. It makes it really easy to switch cameras. I don't know. I'm sorry. Every time my dogs bark, it drives me nuts. But you can switch cameras, makes it really easy. There's some big drawbacks, though, to piggyback guiding. The primary drawback is flexure, or differential flexure. And I am going to not go into any detail about that until the next slide. Another drawback is field rotation. If you, whichever guide star you pick, you are going to see, and the further away from the center of the imaging field that guide star is, everything in the imaging field is going to appear to rotate around that guide star. Not typically a problem, because you can always pick a star within the field, but sometimes, particularly if you have a really wide field scope, you're not exact, and it's not pointed perfectly at your same target that your OTA is pointed at, then that may be a little bit difficult. Sometimes you can figure it out, sometimes you can't, but you may end up spending some time worrying about your guide star or noticing field rotation. Possible undersampling error, and this is what I was saying a little bit earlier about that 1/5 rule. You can guide at 1/5 the focal length of your imaging scope, but in my experience, the OAG provided tighter stars, so I don't quite know what that means. It definitely gave me a worse PhD graph, or a choppier PhD graph, but that's because it's detecting more of the errors, which most of those errors are going to be seeing, but some of them are not. It's just a little bit more sensitive to error, and with the ability to make such small corrections, I think that's why I did see a nice improvement when I switched to an off-axis guider, just tighter stars in general. And in my experience, I saw a considerable difference. Here's the other thing. Off-axis guiders used to be considered expensive. You used to have to pay, I'd say about $1,000, maybe $800–900 to buy a good off-axis guider and a sufficient guide cam, and then the attachments to attach it to your scope. And that always turned people off. It's a small piece of gear for that much money. Whereas a dovetail and rings, well, that seemed, again, more intuitive. It's something you kind of want. It's kind of sexier than just this little off-axis guider with the prism, but it is it does add up. And you see there I have dovetail, mounting rings. When on that particular scope, I needed a counterweight on underneath, a dovetail underneath and a counterweight underneath to get it to balance. So what I quickly realized was I was able to sell all of my mountings and pretty much make up the $800 I needed for the off-axis guider. And shortly after I paid my $800, what ended up happening was a bunch of off-axis guiders hit the market and a bunch of new guide cameras hit the market. And all of a sudden, off-axis guiding became a $300–400 thing, maybe slightly less if you buy used, rather than the large chunk that it had been very soon before that. The other drawback is that piggyback guiding can be heavy. You are adding another piece of gear onto your scope, and with a equatorially mounted scope, you're putting the weight further out, and it's a really bad spot to have the weight. Now you can get a little bit smarter and you can put it underneath, but that won't quite eliminate that risk of differential flexure, which, oh, where'd my, there we go. I'm gonna have to do this slide first. Which, no, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna do this slide first. I'm gonna start here. Off-axis guiding. So what is off-axis guiding? Off-axis guiding is using a device like this. And this is a skinny off-axis guider. And you'll notice the prism there. So what ends up happening is the light passes through that circle, and only the very edge of the field, the part that hopefully wouldn't hit your sensor, is picked off and pushed up through the hole that you see on the top there. That hole is in line with where your guiding sensor would sit. So it's basically picking the light off axis, and that's where it gets its name. So what are the benefits? Well, you're basically eliminating differential flexure, which I will get to in the next slide, as you saw. But yeah, you're guiding at the imaging focal lengths, much more responsive to a shifting star. And I don't mean a shifting star due to seeing. I mean what I said earlier. You may just see much tighter stars, lighter and smaller, and the focus is fixed with the imaging OTA. So you do not, when you focus your guide camera, you really only have to do it once. You can leave your guide camera, excuse me, your guider and your guide camera set up without removing them, possibly even on your scope with the camera attached, and just not take it off. And when you put it back on, or when you mount your scope up the next night, you don't have any adjustments to make to that. It's going to be in focus with your imaging OTA. Drawbacks can be expensive. I said it can also be inexpensive or less expensive than a wide field guide scope, but if you have to have the best, or you have a a CCD with an integrated off-axis guider, then sometimes those can be a bit more expensive, but you do get what you pay for. They tend to be more rigid and more trouble-free. The number one drawback, or one of the reasons that I believe off-axis guiders can have a bad reputation, is that it requires a better guide cam. And that also goes back to what I said earlier about the price and how new technology, new guide cameras, and new hardware on the market brought the price of it down. There are better guide cameras on the market for, I believe you can buy one of them for $150, whereas previously the Lodestar was the only real go-to guide camera for off-axis guiding, and that used to cost $600. Hard to set up. So this is another thing, and I'll just tell you this. I had a difficult time making this presentation because I wanted to be able to break down how easy it is to set up an off-axis guider, despite the fact that it has a reputation for being difficult. And what I came to realize is it really isn't that difficult. You just have to follow a few specific rules. But before I go into those rules, you knew it was coming. Differential flexure. This is the primary problem with a piggyback guide scope, and differential flexure frustrated the heck out of me and cost me a whole heck of a lot of money. And when you start fighting differential flexure, you have a really difficult time figuring out what's wrong because you just don't know where it's coming from. Differential flexure is caused by the shifting weight as the scope tracks. That slight shift between the two fields as the weight shifts causes the two cameras to not be perfectly aligned or oriented the same way they were when the image started, when the sub-image started. So that what that ends up doing is it ends up causing basically lines through your image. Now, lines through your image can be caused by a few different things, and differential flexure can come from a few different places. So as a beginner, when you start to see lines instead of stars, you want to fix it. But if it's not one of the if a non-mechanical cause is fixing it, excuse me, if a non-mechanical issue is causing it, then you're going to be playing around with software settings and PhD, and you're going to be on the PhD message board saying, this is my issue, what settings do I need to plug into PhD to fix it? And what you might find is there's nothing you can plug into PhD to fix this. This is a problem with some loose piece of gear either sagging or just shifting slightly. It doesn't take much. In fact, it takes very little. So after driving the PhD guys nuts, you're going to start tightening up everything on your system. But no matter how tight you tighten it, that shift may still exist. You might even buy a better focuser and assume that's going to fix it. And it might, but it might not. So if you start chasing this issue and you start chasing the issue with dollar bills, you might have a lot of dollar bills into it before you actually realize that you need an OAG. An OAG is the fix for this issue. And basically an OAG is the only way to kind of eliminate differential flexure in a headache-free way. And there we go, the real fix in OAG. Like I said, it eliminates differential flexure as an issue. The guider error closely matches the error in the field of view. It doesn't require independent focusing once you set it up. Long focal length guiding is more sensitive to errors, and it's just plain old better. What are the limits and difficulties of an off-axis guider? Back focus. Both the OTA and the guide cam must be able to come to focus. The guide cam must be sensitive enough to pick up the dimmer stars. And setup. You have to put thought and effort into setting it up. So let's take those one at a time. Back focus. The optics must have enough back focus to fit the off-axis guider's optical focus length. So what do I mean by that optical focus length? Look at the Lacerda guider on the right there. I believe the optical focus length is basically the distance from the front to the back minus any threading that extends out. So you see the flange on the right side. If you're going to thread something onto that and it's going to bump right up to the body of the internal part of the off-axis guider, then that isn't counted in optical focus length. So the optical focus length of that is basically just the body of the guider. And I believe offhand it's in the 11 to 12 millimeter range for the Lacerda. The optical focus length for the for the guider on the left right there, which is actually the SBIG integrated off-axis guider, and this particular one only works with SBIG cameras. The optical focus length of that, I believe, is 21.5 inches. Don't quote me there. Look it up online. Don't use that for your math. But you see all millimeters. I said inches, didn't I? That would be very big. Millimeters. So you can see they vary, and all of them vary. Basically, there are a few companies that offer what we call thin off-axis guiders, like Lacerda there, which want them to replace, for a DSLR, just replace the, what's a DSLR adapter?
The T-ring?
T-ring adapter, yeah. It replaces the T-ring adapter. So basically, it just clicks right into the DSLR the way a lens would. Some of them are thicker, and in some cases, they're a lot thicker, and they will integrate into your system. But you do have to pay attention to that. If you are buying a CCD camera with a integrated off-axis guider, you can pay a lot less attention to this. And that is one of the benefits of buying integrated off-axis guiders. But you do have to pay attention to that optical focus length. And that's a pain in the butt. And let me fix that real quick. I am really sorry. None of this rendered the way it was supposed to. There we go. This is for the monster. This is a schematic for the monster off-axis guider, which I believe is made by Teleview. Or I'm sorry. Astrodon. The MMOAG, I forget what that first M stands for. But this is a great example of a schematic that if you buy your own off-axis guider from whichever company you buy it from, you should draw this schematic out so that you have a reference. Do it for your own system. Don't use these numbers. But it really it does a good job of basically helping you configure the camera and off-axis guider. The main rule here is A must equal B. B is the difference, B is the distance from the CCD sensor to the center of the prism. A is the distance from the center of the prism to the guiding CCD. As long as those are equal, then your cameras are parfocal. That could be the biggest difficulty you have, but if you do the math like this, you're going to be able to get yourself close. There are some cases where you do not have enough inward focus, but that may mean inward focus on your guide cam, but that may mean that you have to change your distance right here. You might need an adapter between the imaging CCD and the off-axis guider. But the key point is to make sure that that A distance equals that B distance. And whether the schematics are posted on for the specific off-axis guider, online for the specific off-axis guider, or whether you just do the measurements with a caliper or whichever method you choose, it's actually pretty easy to get close. And I'd say close enough. You can get pretty darn close by eye. So just by using a caliper, you can get yourself close enough that you're ready to go out and set up and work on the next step. But before we get to the next step, the second part of this is the sensors must sit, both sensors must sit within the corrected field. You have to add those optical lengths. You have to count everything that's in the imaging train, and you have to make sure that that will fit within the back focus limit of your optical tube. For example, let me give you a positive example and a negative example. The positive example, I was so happy when William Optics introduced the Star 71 because it had a generous back focus, or it offered generous back focus for a wide field, fast imaging scope. It had enough back focus that I could fit my S-Big camera on it and still use my off-axis guider. It was one of the first that I saw that you're able to do that with, and I bought it. I scooped it up as soon as I possibly could, basically because of that. But there are a lot of cameras that will not offer enough back, or excuse me, there are a lot of optical tubes that will not offer enough back focus for my particular camera. my old William Optics with the field flattener in it had required too much back focus, and I just couldn't get perfect stars to the edge of the field. So it was basically incompatible with my camera for that reason and a few others. So you have to count everything that's in the optical train, and you want to make sure that it's going to work with your setup. Or maybe because you have a very expensive camera and you have a very, or you've purchased a rigid off-axis guider and you've purchased a nice guide camera, maybe you want to switch out your optical tubes. You know, optical tubes, when you get an expensive camera, tend to come and go. It used to be your pride and joy, unless you have something like an astrophysics or some premium scope. Optical tubes can come and go, but the rest of the optical train, that might stick around for a bit. So you have to count everything in your optical train, and remember to count everything in your optical train for any of your setups. I have the Star 71 and an RC. RCs tend to have generous back focus. Basically, for this exact reason, you might want to fit a lot of stuff in that optical train. But the point being, you want to draw multiple schematics for each configuration. Keep those schematics on hand for when you go out or when you're switching setups. Because again, remember, you may have a different adapter or spacer in either the spot that's green right there or the spot that's beige right there. I know that for both of my setups, I have to have different spacers in each area. So I have to find a way to remember that. And you know, this hobby, you are going to get everything you need and go out to a dark site. Make sure you bring that extra spacer. Don't forget it, or else you're not going to be, make sure to bring those adequate or appropriate spacers, because you are not going to be imaging if you get that wrong. So yeah, I just want to reiterate, that is the issue with back focus. That is the first of the 3 issues you may have. Make sure you get those right, and you have eliminated the absolute most difficult part of setting up an off-axis guider. The second issue is a very sensitive guide camera is required. Stick to mono. Can an RGB work? Possibly, but maybe not all the time. You get a much more sensitive guide camera out of a mono guide camera. And I can point to specific guide cameras that work. And for now, I would stick to the list. Because if you buy one of the 4 guide cameras on this list and you're using an off-axis guider, you probably will not have issues. Can you use an older but more sensitive sensitive mono camera? Yes, you can. People are doing that. Can I guarantee it's sensitive enough? No, I can't. You will be pushing your exposure lengths up, most likely. But if you are trying to use a Starshoot auto guider, version 1, I do not believe it will work. In fact, I can say the reason I couldn't get my off-axis guiders working for the first time was because I was using a Starshoot auto guider. The other thing that I will say, and this is more for DSLRs, I recommend a off-axis guider with a body like the 2 are shown here. Meaning you can insert it all the way into the tube, the off-axis guider draw tube, I'll call it, and not infringe or have it bump up against something as you're pushing it in. I had a particular configuration I had to run when I was trying to set up my Starshoot auto guider, which has a wide body as opposed to that barrel style body. And the wide body would bump into the flash on my DSLR camera. So those smaller bodies are, I would say, a little bit more beneficial. And if you pick from one of these 4 cameras here, you will be getting one of those, and you will have fewer troubles. Setup. So you've already got your spacing correct, and you've already got your sensitive guide camera. Basically, all you do is screw it on. Now, going back to back focus and the spacers that you're going to be paying attention to, I do just want to say one thing. You're going to be, and I mentioned it before, you're going to be possibly buying spacers. Buy as few spacers as you can. You want as few thread-to-thread interfaces as possible. And that might, depending on how particular you are, that might involve buying custom adapters, but they also offer a lot of different sizes of adapters here. And in some cases, the companies have specific recommendations for specific adapters you would use for their scopes. And in almost every case, you can ask the vendor or the manufacturer for assistance, and they're more than glad to give it to you. But in addition to buying as few as possible, go threaded. You do not want tension fittings on there. They just introduced flexure, not necessarily differential flexure, but they can introduce sag. You can have a few different issues of them, and as long as you're doing it, do it right. So you've screwed it on, and you're going to focus your main OTA using the focuser on your main OTA. You want to focus using your normal focus routine. Some of us, most of us focus either using a Batonov mask, but if you don't use a Batonov mask and you just watch the donuts get tighter, you can do that. After you do that, you want to focus the guide camera. That basically involves, in most cases, sliding the guide camera into the tube and tightening it down. Some OAGs have helical focusers, which is a big benefit. Every off-axis guider that I've used had you sliding the guide camera back, kind of in a push-pull setup, in or out. It can be a little bit tedious, but basically you're only doing it once, and then you kind of know where you are, where you have to have it. It does not have to be perfectly in focus. They say a little bit of defocus is okay, but I'm going to say try and get it in as good of a focus as you possibly can, because you're going to be able to get it good enough, but you're probably not going to get it perfect. And you're going to be at the outside of the field, so your stars may not be perfectly round as well, but the guide programs, PhD or whatever guide program you're using, may in fact, or do in fact not require round stars. They can take slightly seagull-shaped stars. Use a pencil mark to mark your focus point. So if you bang it, or if you break it down, or whatever you do, you know where that focus point is. And when I say use pencil marks, that's on your guide camera because it is slid into your draw tube. And that's if you're using a push-pull setup and not a helical focuser or anything like that. So just draw a line right around it. Remember, you might have 2 different setups, so you might have a couple different lines on there. Just remember which one is which. Maybe write it on your schematic. And then start guiding. You know, if you're set up and you aren't worrying about differential flexure and you plug all your settings into PhD2, then when you start guiding and it calibrates it, you may just have a trouble-free setup. So there are some potential issues. Wrong threading. Remember, prior planning. In addition to looking at the distance, remember to pay attention to which threads it is. We have M48s, we have M42s, we have T2s. There are flange types. Just make sure you have it. And if that stuff's over your head, ask your vendor what do I need to buy. They find a way to justify their existence. They help you set up your system. So ask them. I would love to give help on every, and I'm going to get a million emails tonight. Will this work with this, with this? And I don't know, because I have used an off-axis. I have used 3 different off-axis guiders on 6 different setups, but I can only comment on those particular setups. I can't really go any further. Another potential issue is that you cannot focus your guide cam. And this happened to me a few times, but the ultimate reason was that A didn't equal B. And had I done that initial planning, or had I really understood the concept of the guide camera, which is on that initial slide, then I would have realized what I was doing wrong. If you can't focus your guide camera, but your main imaging camera is in focus, then the issue is that A doesn't equal B. If you can't focus either camera, then you have improper sensor distance. That means that the overall optical distance from your sensor to your tube, to your main imaging tube, is not correct. And that means you have to go back to that schematic and figure out exactly what's wrong. Another potential issue is that the prism can infringe on the light path. This is going to happen more if you're using a massive sensor, but some prisms are adjustable, and you can move it in and out. In fact, I think most of them are going to be adjustable. So that may be one of the things you want to do. Now, it's a delicate balance, and if you are switching between setups, it may be a terrible inconvenience, but and you might find that the prism still infringes in one of your setups more than the other, but it's not terrible. And I will say this, the flats take care of it. Your flats will take care of it considerably if your prism is still infringing on your light path. Is it better to get it out of there? Ultimately, yes, but I know that I have a slight infringement in one particular setup, and rather than moving my prism as I switch it back and forth between setups, I leave it where it is, and I just take flats and fix it with those. The other potential issue is that you can't see any stars in your guide camera at all. But that goes also back to what I had said earlier, is you need that more sensitive guide camera. So if you have the more sensitive guide camera and you're certain that it is set up correctly, or I should say, and you're certain that it's hooked up correctly, one thing I recommend, and I forgot to put this in the slide, is take out a flashlight, shine it down the tube, and if it illuminates both your imaging and your guide camera, well, you know they're working, right? So basically, it's just a matter of getting it focused, and that goes right back to what I had said earlier. Can't focus guide cam, A doesn't equal B. Can't focus either camera, improper sensor distance. That is it. That is basically it. I'm going to pop back and check chat because I hear all those bleeps. Kate, can I ask someone in the room whether, just to summarize, were there any questions for me, or were most of the questions asked on the fly as we went?
Hey, Adam, I just had a comment about cameras, but you already covered it, and there's nothing else.
Okay, thank you. Then, if all of the questions are answered, I'm basically just going to go.
Adam, you may want to touch on like very long focal length scopes, like 3,000, 4,000 millimeter, where you may have to have a rotator to be able to find a star, regardless of how sensitive your guide camera is.
All right, so that's a good point, and I'll tell you, I can't speak to this that well, but I do know, yeah, a lot of the guys out there complain about not being able to find a guide star with their very long focal length scopes that tend to be, I don't know, 16 plus inches, and they may use a rotator because they cannot find guide stars. So they pre-plan using some sort of software to determine where a bright star would be in that guide field. And they, in some cases, set up some of the more advanced software to put the guide they rotate their entire camera and put the guide star within that field. I don't do that, so I can't speak too well to that. But that could be an issue. Taking that into account, basically, you've heard what I can speak to about it. If you are imaging with a setup like that, then you may just want to pay a lot of attention to that. Maybe I still recommend this. Find someone who's using your setup or the setup you're planning on buying, and make sure that it works. Make sure that someone's used it successfully. There are cases where you can buy a product from brand X, an OTA from brand X, a guide cam from brand X, or excuse me, an OAG from brand X, and it may not work. So you just want to make sure someone's using that particular setup. Excuse me.
Yeah, Adam, I've worked with a few scopes that are in the 3+ meter focal length, if you want me to talk about some of my experiences there.
Please, David.
So, you know, one of the cases we had, there was no rotator in the system, right? It's just a fixed bolted plate on the back of the research telescope we have. And, you know, in order to make that system work, you know, what we ended up doing was just binning, you know, the heck out of the Lodestar guider that we had on that system. And the binning gets you higher sensitivity per pixel, also does a better job of matching image scale for the guide system, because tools like PhD2 don't particularly like really, really big stars. They can work, but they seem to naturally want to have stars of a certain size. So binning them does a better match there and gets better results anyway. And in that case, you know, then you start picking up fainter stars faster. And even with that, you know, it's a 16-inch f8 RC scope we're using. Even there, we never really ran into issues where a rotator was absolutely necessary. We could shift the field of view until we found a guide star. But there are definitely cases, you know, we're never imaging up near an area where there's not a lot of stars. Like I think M81 is a really trouble spot, right, for small fields of view and long focal length scopes. You know, so we never hit any of those where we might run into that. So there's definitely cases where using a rotator can certainly help considerably if you have that capability.
Thank you, David.
Adam?
And Eric is the one we should hear from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me tell you our experience. We're using a 16-inch f9 with the off-axis S-Big guider. And I would say that a rotator is absolutely essential for the kind of imaging you do. Once you determine that you have a target, the next thing you do is you go into something like the software Guide 9, and you rotate the field until you have a star of, say, at least mag 9, more likely mag 8, and that determines what your field of view is going to be. Now, when you get into emission nebula, it's not so much an issue because there are lots of stars around there, but galaxies, especially smaller galaxies, are a real pain because there aren't a lot. So your position of your guide star controls really your field of view more than you probably would like. And there's really no way around that, because without a good guide star, you simply can't guide.
Thank you.
So any script you set up has to show not only the location of the field of view, but your rotation angle to your guider. And that's part of the scripting, and what we use is ACP.
Eric, what kind of, you're using a CCD camera as your guide camera, right?
We're using the S-Big SDXL, so that has the off-axis guider built in the filter wheel.
Okay, gotcha.
Adam, the reason why I brought that up is that there was a lot of questions on the question, the thread, where, you know, will this camera work with this? I just wanted to point out that, you know, there is no all-in-one solution. Nobody could tell you, hey, if you buy this camera and this off-axis guider, it's gonna work. There is no flat answer. I just wanted to point that out. That was the reason. Even with a sensitive camera, as we see Eric's example, he needs a rotator to make it work. So there is no yes to all kind of an answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Adam, one more thought. If you have, like we do, the long focal length with the focal length of 3563, I think, you know, this rotator issue is a big issue. If you have like the 130 I have here, which is either an F7 or F548, then it really doesn't make much difference. There are always stars in the field of view because your field of view is so wide. It's only the long focal length where the rotator is absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I'll just say this. I don't think I have ever had an issue finding a guide star with either my Edge or my RC, or of course any of my wide field scopes, since I got my new guide camera, which is the Lodestar. I never really had that issue. I should say, since I got my Lodestar that I have on my S-Big CCD camera, that has a really good, it's a really good off-axis guider, and it actually has a reducer on it, which expands the field. But I did not have that issue, so I think it's something that it's an issue you can have, but I don't expect it to hit everyone or a lot of people. But keep in mind, if it's a long focal length and a slow scope, it's where you're going to have more of those issues. Okay. Today is our first giveaway, and I had sent you to the website to check it out. We are giving away a Stellarmate, and I want to thank Jasem Mutlak for offering this to us. Like I said, it's a brand new product. It's a really cool product, and it is basically 3 of them we're going to give away. And even though it's a free giveaway, you do have to pay shipping, but it's only going to cost you $35 to get this. Basically, you're covering shipping. There are a few rules. You must be an active imager, so he wants you to use it. He doesn't want it to sit in the box. you must be willing to offer feedback. And, well, those are the two rules. Keep in mind, this is an open source project, and we are astrophotographers. We are not, it's not like the iPhone. We don't have millions and millions of users who are testing out everything and giving feedback. We need as much feedback from the small user base we have. So he is really hoping to get a lot of feedback on this. The winners will be announced next session. So how are we going to run this? I am going to pop back. And definitely not make that. Ooh. Definitely take back my screen so you're not seeing that infinity. Basically, if you are in chat, I see a lot of people in chat today, and you want to be entered in my random winner selector, well, type I. This is in chat on our website. And I am going to give you, I don't know, a minute or two to type I. 71 viewers. I got one. This is going to take too long to write down. Keep saying I. Now's your chance. And I said we are going to announce it next session. But next week, well, not next week, 2 weeks from now is a really, and let me rehash it. What does it do? Let me do this while I'm waiting to get all the I's in. Excuse me. Thank you. Sorry, you're not seeing my screen. Stellarmate is an all-in-one open source mount and camera control device that, well, controls your mount and your camera. It is compatible. Well, basically, it's an all-in-one device that you can control from a separate computer or a smartphone, or basically anything you have to access it. I believe it can even be run independently. So if you want to output it to a monitor, you can. But well, you can run it from your phone, or you can run it from your computer. You can run it via Wi-Fi. You can run it over Ethernet. And it basically, when we say all-in-one, it does a number of different things. It'll plate solve. It'll guide. It will acquire. It is compatible with all the major camera companies and basically does everything you could possibly need it to do. Jasem had presented for us a few months back. The presentation is EKOS or K-stars. And on the Stellarmate website, you can read all about it, or on our website, you can hear about the basically the software behind this, and you'll learn some of the details. But I think this device is really interesting, and the most attractive thing about this, I believe, is the price, which is $149 plus shipping. And it is available on the market now, but 3 people who have already said I are going to get one for just the shipping. That's what it does. I'm going to go back here. And yes, thank you for that. I am trying to copy all the I's. Gonna make sure that I got them. Let me take my screen back just in case anyone wants to be anonymous. And yes, next session will be, well, I should say it this way, we are not on next Sunday. A lot of people should, if I hope, be traveling to the solar eclipse. I am unfortunately not one of them, but I know a lot of our regulars are going to be traveling, and we do not want to give you any reasons not to go see it. I want to make sure. Okay, I've got a few more eyes, so I want to make sure I've got that. So we'll be announcing the winner on the session after that, which is 2 weeks from today, the 27th. I'm recopying the eyes because I got more. And that appears that it will work. I got them. Okay, thank you for your submissions. I will announce them on that session. So if you're watching, you'll hear it at the beginning of the session. You won't have to stay too long, but hey, I'd rather you stay for the whole session. So make sure you check in then. I will also try and post them in the description. Well, I will also post them in the description of the session. But you will have to contact me because I do not have all of your contacts. I only get limited details on your info via chat. So keep an eye out for that. 3 people are going to win some cool stuff, and what we're going to do is eventually have hopefully Gisem on, but also have you guys on to tell us what you think. This may just be one of those coolest products, or one of these game-changing products of in astrophotography. Thank you for watching. Thank you for submitting, and we will see you all next week. Have a good night.